Hello and welcome to this screencast. This is a screencast of a talk that I gave at WordCamp London last Saturday. It's 6 days on, so we're now Friday the 27th of March, I think. Yeah. I've had a few people ask me if I was going to share my slides, and I was going to, but on their own, the slides aren't that helpful. And I had some live examples that I was going to in a different tab. So I've decided that the best way to share my talk is to do a little screencast and run through everything that I said last Saturday. The WordCamp went really well, and my talk was really good. Well, not to big myself up, but it was very highly demanded. There were people getting turned away, unfortunately. So quite a lot of people, I think, who wanted to see the talk missed it. It obviously will be up at some point on WordPress TV, but in the meantime, I thought it might be helpful to do this and allow people to see it and to know what I spoke about. So without further ado, the talk, as you can probably tell, is called Building Themes with the WordPress REST API. Sorry, I wasn't ready, got myself off guard. So yes, I am Jack Lennox. I work for Automatic on the theme generators team. It's part of the theme division, which is a fairly big chunk of Automatic. It's about 30 people, I think, now, of getting very near to that. I work as my title is kind of design engineer, but yeah, we have people on the team who do theme generation, so they obviously create new themes. We've also got some people who work on the theme user experience, and that's what I do. But I have a background in agency work and that kind of thing, so I've done quite a lot of site building with WordPress, should we say. So yeah, that's my background and who I am. REST API, what's the big deal? Well, before I dive in, I've got some examples which I think kind of can show off the sort of thing that I want to talk about today. So the first one I'm going to go to, this is a little side project that the Sunday Times of London put together. I think it was a team of developers from the Times and Sunday Times who were competing in a little sort of competition called Build the News last October. So this is a website which has been built with an Angular front end and a WordPress backend. So all of the communication is done with the REST API. And I'll go into more detail about how this works later in the talk. But the important part is just to know that the content is coming from WordPress. That's the important bit here. And just to show you what this kind of approach allows me to do, if I click next down here, it's quite small. I might actually just big that up slightly. There we go, zoom in a bit. I click next, and I get the next set of posts. And you can see if I scroll up and down, these little icons here are post formats. And I think if I go on a bit further, I can also navigate with the keyboard, so I can just press right on my keyboard. You can see some more, and if I go on further, where are they? Where's the one I want you to see? Here we go. Yeah, so you've got like an image post format as well. Yeah, it's all WordPress. The really nice thing, as you can probably tell, is that it's not loading. This isn't local either, but all the content has been loaded on that first page load, so I can move around as quickly as I like, and it's all already here. It's really nice. And I haven't actually looked at the WordPress side of this, but yeah, you could presumably change these titles and the content and everything, and that would change, obviously, what you can see here. So it's quite nice. So yeah, this is a little project. I'll share the URLs for all this kind of stuff at the end, so don't worry too much about trying to Google for this or anything. The next example, I'm going to go back to normal zoom. This is Quartz. So this is a site that's on WordPress.com. The domain is qz.com or qz if you're American, and this is a VIP client on WordPress.com. They're using the WordPress.com REST API, which I'll also come into in this talk. The important thing to note is just the way it works. So if we scroll down, I'm going to scroll to one of the normal page links. So we click there, for example, and you can see it's really, really fast. And there's not a normal standard page load going on. It's just getting that content from the REST API and repainting what you can see on the screen. It's really nice, really cool. I definitely recommend having a quick look at it if you get a moment. qz.com. Oh, I meant to go to another page. Let's try a different one, just for fun. It's a bit slow, maybe. Yeah, see, it's quite cool. Oh, and here's one I made earlier. So my team had a meetup, or the division had a meetup about 6 weeks ago, and a side project that I've been tinkering with is this theme called Picard, which is it's a long story to it, but it's essentially called Picard because it's a joke about the next generation of themes. We had another internal theme, Automatic, called Patrick Stewart, so I was just carrying on that illustrious baton carrying in the relay, whatever. Anyway, so this was a theme that I've been hacking around with. It didn't look anywhere near as good as this before we had our meetup, but at our meetup we got to explore the idea a bit further. So I'll just show you kind of the navigation, for example. If I click on About, you can see it's loaded instantly. It's pretty nice. And there, and it's changing the page content, which is really cool. You can see it's changing between each post. So that's just normal posts. If I go back to the home page, we've got the real nice bit. So if I click through to say this first post, you can see we've got the normal title, we've got the content, as you would have, and a date. But the really cool thing about this is that if I click on the left arrow, we just animate through, and we can go on again. And I can use the keyboard to navigate, so I'm going to press right on the keyboard and right. It's a bit janky. I think we could work a bit on the animations, but sometimes they work a bit smoother than other times. But it's not too bad. I could probably do a better job there. Yeah, so really nice. And the content does change on each time. It's all just this like Star Trek Ipsum. But yeah, we were quite proud of this. And what you're also probably noticing is that it's not having to load, and that's because all of the content has been stored in local storage, and I'll come on to that as well. But you have this instant sort of effect of the user being able to navigate around your site much quicker than normal. We have these comments as well. This wasn't actually a comment from Matt, and we obviously just faked it. This is running locally on my machine, but I'll just write a quick response. Why not? Just so you can see another nice thing we've got here. So just for example, hello world. Oh, and I've misspelt it, but never mind. We hit post, and in next to no time, it's in, and it's just that kind of really nice live update. This is all using React, which is an interface library for JavaScript, which I'll explain a bit later in the talk. But yeah, all of the communication with WordPress is done by the REST API. And this talk will come on to what that actually means. So hopefully your appetite is well and truly whetted. So let's get on with it. There are three main aspects to this talk. The first is what is a REST API and how does it work? The second is how you can work with a REST API. And the third is building themes that use the REST API. So let's get started with the first one. What is a REST API? So in case you're wondering, it stands for Representational State Transfer Application Programming Interface. And when you break it down, that does kind of make sense, but I've tried to put it into sort of slightly more layman's terms that I can understand. So essentially, a REST API provides a way to retrieve pure data. It's usually in JSON or XML format over HTTP. And I've said here there's no loops necessary. So what I mean is, if you wanted to get data out of your blog, you're probably mostly used to, or your site, you're mostly used to doing that in PHP. So you would create a loop, and you might use a WP query to have a custom loop or whatever. And then you're using things like the title and things like the content and the date and the author and that kind of thing to get your information out of WordPress. The REST API gives you that data with just in pure data. So if it's in JSON, for example, you just get that whole lot. And I'll show how that looks. But yeah, you can say to it like, I want this post ID. It just gives you it all, and it's in HTTP. It's over HTTP, so there's no, you don't have to write any server-side code at all. You can just get it. It's really nice. And for that reason, it's very good for mobile apps and environments where you don't want a full web page to render, but you want content from a blog or site. So if you're building an iPhone app, for example, you might just want to get the list of posts, and you don't want to have to do anything PHP-wise. You just want to say what's the 10 latest posts, and you'll get them. So that's that. How does this relate to WordPress? Well, there's a WordPress REST API, and it's coming to core. So it's being developed right now, and I'm going to go into a bit more detail about that. But yeah, that's why we're excited. That's why we're talking about this now. A short history of WordPress REST APIs. WordPress.com has had one since 2012. and that's accessible for self-hosted sites via Jetpack. So if you have the Jetpack plugin, you can use the WordPress.com REST API. The core plugin is known as WP API, and I've got some links at the end to where you can go and check that out. It's on GitHub. And one of the first REST API plugins for WordPress is called the JSON. It was just called JSON API. It's still in the repository, and it was first added in 2009. And I tinkered with it not long after that, which is kind of weird, but for totally different reasons to why I'm talking about this now. So what does it look like? I mentioned about how you can get content without having to do any PHP or anything. This is kind of what you have. So that's my local URL at the top for the Picard site. So it's just Picard. It should probably be picard.dev or something, but that's all it is. So with the REST API plugin installed, we get this new WP JSON URL. And then if we just add, say, posts to the end of the URL, we'll get the standard loop. So by default, that's going to be your 10 most recent posts. And obviously that will also respect your settings. So if you say that you only want 5 in your WordPress reading settings, that'll change. So the top part of this is Chrome, this browser. So the top part is just totally unhuman friendly JSON. It's quite nice actually to read. It's quite easy to see what's going on. The good thing about Chrome and the dev tools is it can give you a much more human readable version. So that's what I'm seeing below. And it puts it all into alphabetical order, that kind of thing. So you can actually see what's happening here. We've got the content, and you can see it's got the normal kind of what you would get from the content. It's also got this author bit, which is another like array of all the different bits to do with the author, and the post ID is ID, for example. And that all kind of correlates to exactly what you're seeing above. But that's how we get some basic posts out of the REST API. And you can see you just go to literally like http://yoursite.com/wpjson, and then you start getting data this way. So why now? Which you may be wondering, because you might think, well, I said that there was a plugin in the repository in 2009, and it's why are people talking about this now? One thing I actually didn't mention, the plugin that is in the repository, so that was built, it was part of a project for the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and they wanted to build a site that had a Ruby front end with a WordPress backend, and they didn't want to have to do what I've been saying about dealing with PHP and that kind of thing. So they built a REST API, and that's why they did the first one. But things have changed significantly since then. And I mean, in a way, that's kind of a strange reason for having a REST API for WordPress, because there's no tangible benefit necessarily to using Ruby on the front end. Ruby developers would probably disagree with me, but yeah, there's no obvious reason to do that. But the big thing that's changed since 2009 is JavaScript. So JavaScript, y'all, that's my slide. JavaScript has gotten huge, and it's putting more and more power in the hands of web developers. And in particular, a lot of the frameworks and the technology that's being built, the new libraries and stuff with JavaScript, it's all designed for working with REST APIs. And as this talk goes on, you'll really start to see why that is. Here is just a couple of the frameworks and libraries that are obviously massive these days. Node.js, which is the whole server JavaScript thing, which some of you have hopefully encountered in one place or another. Then you've got things like Backbone, Angular, Ember. They're all JavaScript frameworks for building applications. And then the one that I mentioned with our theme, Picard, is React. We'll come back to these later in the talk, but React is a library just for building user interfaces. The interesting thing about these frameworks and libraries is that in 2009, they either didn't exist or they had literally just started. So they were, nothing compared to what they are now. And back in 2009, JavaScript was still mainly just used for bits of tinkering, animations, a bit of jQuery here and there. It wasn't really anything like what it is these days, and some of the crazy things that are being built with it, which are amazing. There's a really nice quote about the power of JavaScript. I said, it's putting more power, and sometimes people wonder what I mean by that. So this is Trek Lewowski, who's part of the core team of Ember, and he said that since the start of the web, for every interaction, there have been two supercomputers involved. The supercomputer sitting in front of you and the supercomputer in a data center somewhere. We have barely begun to take advantage of that supercomputer sitting in front of you. And it's a really good point. If you think about what a native application can do versus what you do on the web, it's miles apart. But if you think about, you've probably all seen small examples of things that can happen in the browser, and no one's really doing it, even though we can do it. So you put all the load on the server, that's where everything's always happening, and we just sort of view things through the web. But there's so much more we can do, and so much more we can do for our users if we think about this in a different way. So, how can you work with a REST API? The sort of common way that this is done, and the term that's the kind of umbrella term that's been given to it, is what's known as a SPA, or a single page application. So a single page application is different from a multi-page web application, which is kind of basically the standard way that a website works. You might not necessarily think of building a website as building an application, but effectively you are. Like, even if it's just a basic HTML site, if it's multi-page, it's kind of an application. So yeah, if you try and think about it that way around. A normal multi-page web application just has normal hyperlinks, the original web-based hyperlinks. You click a hyperlink, you get taken to a different page. In the way that modern websites have been developed, what that generally means within one website is every time you change page, the whole thing gets taken down, the whole thing gets put back up again. So everything is loaded again, and obviously things are cached and it's not that bad, but yeah, you're effectively tearing it all down, putting it all back up, tearing it all down, putting it all back up, and that's what happens as users click from page to page. So a single page application has only one initial server-side page load. And from that point on, interactions are handled with JavaScript. And when done well, that provides a more continuous, fluid experience. I should just put one quick clarifying point here. If you are using Node, which I'm guessing not many people watching this will have done, but if you do use Node, technically you can actually carry on loading stuff from the server via JavaScript, because yeah, the server is run by JavaScript. So, but in a normal WordPress environment, for example, where you're using PHP and Apache or Nginx, there's one server-side load, and then the JavaScript takes over. And it's nothing new. This is Gmail. This is a screenshot of Gmail from 2004, way back in the day. Gmail was one of the first single-page applications, and actually they were doing it well before it was cool. And this was kind of the dawn of AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, which is basically what I've been describing. So you've got JavaScript taking over when the user first arrives, and people were amazed with Gmail because you would go from page to page and there was never actually a full page reload. It was just getting different content and putting that into the browser, into what you could see, which is really nice. An important point to note here, just to be clear, it's not all or nothing. So Gmail obviously was pretty much a full application. They did have a few page loads. I think if you clicked settings and stuff in the original one, you would actually get a page load. But yeah, it's not all or nothing. And WordPress themes and plugins have steadily been doing more and more. This is nothing actually particularly new to WordPress. Lots of plugins have little interactive parts. There's Easy Digital Downloads, which has the sales get updated automatically. You can watch that happening, without having to refresh the page or anything like that. And yeah, so that's a good example of a small part of a kind of SPA thing within a bigger web application. So you don't have to think about it as being your whole screen necessarily. And it's important to note as well that Backbone has been included in WordPress core since 2012. And part of the reason for that is this little bad boy. So this is, I think, an original screenshot of the customizer. So it hasn't changed a great deal, but this is how it originally looked. And the customizer is a full single page application within WordPress. So again, you don't have to make the whole of WordPress a single page application. And if you've used the customizer, you'll know that on the left-hand side, you've got all the different settings that you can change. And as you change those settings, the iframe on the right-hand side, which shows your website, is reloaded. But you're not actually changing the page. You don't hit save and the whole thing refreshes. It's just kind of constantly happening, which is quite nice, quite cool. So what can you actually do with the REST API? REST APIs center around a series of verbs. There are more than I'm going to go through today, but the basic ones to understand are get, post, put, delete. And these actually match up largely with I think they're almost exactly with the HTTP verbs as well. So essentially, you can get posts, pages, comments, etc. You can edit and add post, pages, and comments via post or put, and you can delete posts, pages, and comments, and obviously lots of other things, and there's no reason why widgets and stuff can't be included in that. But this is the kind of fundamental element of what you can do with a REST API. So this means doing all of these things can be done without having to write any PHP or anything else. So you may have done deleting and editing, all that kind of thing, if you've tweaked with any admin stuff or anything like that. But yeah, this is all just done. It's really cool. Sorry, all just doable. That didn't really make any sense. But anyway, let's just carry on. I've had a few takes of this, and I'm gonna steam on with this take because it's going quite well. So, didn't I say something about themes? Oh wait, it's the title of this talk, and I've been talking, I have no timer, but I guess it's been a while, and we haven't actually got on to themes yet. So, here we are now, chapter 3, building themes that use the REST API. Why would you build a theme that uses the REST API? If you aren't convinced yet about what I've been talking about, I have to do that now. So yes, what we're actually talking about is building themes with JavaScript. The REST API is obviously kind of an abstraction in this thing. It's a way of interacting with your data, but it's not something you actually build a theme with. So we need to build something up. For those really fluid interfaces I was showing you at the start, you need JavaScript. So that's what we're really talking about. So there are some significant benefits, I think, and hopefully you're already convinced of that. I think the primary one for me is the look and feel. It's a much more human and a much more engaging user experience. You can make a website work like it really should. And when you think about how much more fluid a native app on your iPhone is, or apps on your your laptops or computer games or anything like that, you have this very engaging experience where things happen in a fluid and dynamic way. And it opens up a lot of things that a lot of people watching this talk probably know a fair amount about, doing animations in CSS and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, in the way that we work these days, it's not that easy to integrate that into the way you build a site, because you can have animation on load and that kind of thing, but it doesn't really give you that full kind of app style experience. The next, I think, big bonus is the speed factor for the user, because you can load content before the user actually tries to interact with it. And that's especially important over mobile connections, because mobile connections just are slow. The cellular turnaround, even on a really great 4G or whatever, you're still going to be waiting a few seconds, and if there's any saturation on the network or whatever, you're going to have some problems. So content can be queued up ready for the user, and actually content that's fetched anyway doesn't have to be thrown away. So when you hit the index of almost any WordPress website where there's 10 posts or whatever, or 5 or whatever shown on the homepage, if you get those posts from the REST API, let's say there's an excerpt on the homepage. If you get those from the REST API, you've actually already got the content, because that will come back anyway. And that's kind of true with WordPress. With PHP. The content is there. You might not echo it, but then when the user goes to the next page, you go back again and you get the content and come back again. So if you load 10 posts, let's say, on an index page, like I showed you with Picard, there's no reason to not just cache that and keep that ready. So then if the user clicks the top post, you've already got everything. You've got the content, you've got the date, you've got the title. You can reformat it to make it look, you can animate it and make it look flashy, but there doesn't have to be another call to the server. It's done. You've got it. And I'll explain again a bit later how you can do that. The other nice thing is the offline factor. So I mentioned a bit earlier in the talk that JavaScript takes over, and all of the interactions are also hijacked, basically. So any clicking, anything like that, which would normally you'd let the browser do its thing, you're actually intercepting that, and you're doing whatever you want to do based on that. So what that means is that if there's a failed connection, you actually can know that. So if the user clicks a link within your site, you can say, oh, sorry, it looks like you've lost your connection. Now, and it's much better, because you can say, you can carry on browsing the stuff that you've already got, and they may have downloaded 10 posts. And if this was a news website like the BBC or something, that's not so bad. They may have gone onto the Underground in London, or they may be anywhere out of connection, in New York or whatever, and they can carry on browsing your site until until they're back online. But it's really nice. They're not just going to have that crappy, page cannot be displayed. And often on a device when that happens, you click back and you can't go back either, and you're stuck. And even though you actually did have something on your phone, it's now gone. It's quite annoying. So that's the nice factor. And then the final one, this is a bit of a smaller one, but there is also the resources element to it and a potentially reduced server load. So again, with the example I've been giving, if the user has already got the content via the index, they're not doing another call to your server. So you can actually preload a lot more stuff for your users and allow them to keep using your site. And if you're getting hammered for some particular post, for example, it's easier for you to handle the caching there and to yeah, not have as much of a server load. It still depends on how you set it up, and obviously if you have a lot of images and stuff, they're still going to be coming from your server. So I'll downplay that one a bit, but there's potential there. You can tweak performance more than you could normally, because you're just putting more stuff in the client, as in the browser. So how can I get started? You may be wondering. I would say that there are two main routes that we can take today. The first route is like the Sunday Times example that I showed at the start. So that's full JavaScript. They're using Angular.js for the interface, and they're just using WordPress as a data storage service and the admin side and everything else. That's perfectly fine, and I don't have any problem with that. But the talk is kind of about building themes, and the one issue that you're going to encounter if you take that route is it kind of requires a bespoke setup. An Angular interface is not installable in any sort of tangible WordPress way that we would currently understand. If it doesn't have an index.php and a style.css, then it's not a theme, so it's hard to distribute and people can't really use it. Also, there are tons of default, not even default, sorry, just built-in features and functions within WordPress, that even just down to clicking to view the post from the post editor. And if you're serving your front end at some different URL or whatever, then none of those links are going to work. You're going to have to create some plugin that goes through and rewrites them all or something. And there's just loads. There's all the whole previewing a draft. There's endless stuff that you're going to want to actually make work for your user. So this is a nice route if you're building something totally for yourself or for a big client project. Nothing wrong with this at all. But if you're building something that you want to distribute and you want other people to use, I think there's a second route, which is to build a skeleton theme, especially in the realm of themes, which can be installed, but from the first page load, the JavaScript will take over. So, and I'll show you what that kind of really means now in terms of actually a theme layout. This is the route that I'm taking. That's what I'm talking about. You can actually fairly easily change what I'm talking to. The first route, it's mainly just about taking stuff out rather than putting anything extra in. So, the tools at our disposal. These are completely opinionated. You could use lots of other things, but for the sake of this talk, I wanted to show some specific examples. So we have vanilla JavaScript, and that's something I promote. It's something I'm not that wonderful with any of this myself at the moment. We've got people that are far more talented than me at Automatic, but it certainly helps. I think when you're getting into this level of working with JavaScript, it's better to understand it up close and personal. And actually, so much JavaScript stuff is really quite easy to understand, and the abstraction that something like jQuery brings is not all that helpful, because you often you can end up with a lot of bloat that you don't need. You can end up not really understanding what your app is doing, and you'll see this theme that we made it's not massive amounts of JavaScript, and actually it can be a bit easier to read if you know what's going on. Vanilla also, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't have any libraries or frameworks or anything. React itself is a library, for example. It's just more of a it's sort of building from a basic level of let's just use JavaScript, and then if we're going to use anything extra, let's see exactly what it does and use it for the specific thing it's for. And I'll come on to that. So React is a library for user interfaces. I've got a little slide on that in a minute. Browserify is, you may have heard of other things like Require.js, and there's a few other similar things. Essentially, it allows you to break down your JavaScript into modules. So if you've worked in themes, you can include files within other files in PHP. It basically gives you that exact same functionality. So in the way that you can require a PHP file, you can require a JavaScript file. And that just allows you to make a more sensible setup. Otherwise, you've got some like behemoth JavaScript file, which is hard for you to read, hard for anyone else to understand. Not ideal, really. And then I've got gulp as number 4. This could be grunt, it could be a makefile. All this basically does is compile everything into one bit of code that you can actually use. And the important part to just bear in mind with something like Browserify is that it doesn't mean that you actually run this kind of multi-JavaScript file thing on your system, because ultimately that's still going to get squished down into one file, but it allows you to have, a nice way of you looking at the code. Then it will get squished and it gets minified and whatever, and then it goes onto the server, so you don't have to worry about what's actually happening beyond that point. And that's where gulp comes in, basically. If you haven't heard of it, you can also automate things like images can get compressed, and you can make sure they're as small as possible, and you can do things with Sass if you've ever used Sass. So anyway, that's that. Vanilla JavaScript. So the key things that we have here are the old school XML HTTP request, which kind of is a bit out of date now, because you're not, like, the idea of that is that you're getting XML, but as I mentioned, the REST API is actually JSON. So, but it's still called that, and it's funny, I saw something about Ajax. It's in this instance, it's actually Ajaj, because we're working with JSON. So yeah, that's one of the core things you obviously need, because that's how you're going to get data and post data and everything else from the REST API. The second thing is local storage. You don't need this, but this is what I'm using for caching stuff that we get. So anything you get from the server in JSON, the really nice thing about JSON is you can just store it as a string. Local storage is a way of storing things in the browser's memory via JavaScript. So it's an interface, it goes back to IE9, I think, so it's fairly well supported, and you can store anything. It's a bit like a cookie, and actually, as far as the EU cookie law thing is concerned, it is a cookie, so if you deal with this, you do have to go through the whole rigmarole of the stupid banner and everything else. But yeah, that's how you can store things. And then I've got this little extra one, which is Service Worker. I alluded to being able to work offline. Service Worker is a new, it's a new sort of JavaScript feature that's being worked on by people at Google. It's already in the latest version of Chrome. And it basically allows you to do all sorts of crazy clever stuff with JavaScript if the user has no connection. So the user can come to your site with no connection anyway, and you can actually render the site and do different clever things based on what connection they have, or if it's none, then anything you've already preloaded. Quite cool. We won't talk about that today, but just look it up if it sounds interesting to you. React. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It was developed by Facebook, and it was open sourced in 2013. It's fairly simple to understand. There's not a huge amount to it, and they've got a really nice... Well, there is obviously complexity to it if you really want to get into it, but they've got some really nice examples on their website, which I have a link at the end. And that's something I'm using for dealing with the markup and all the theme stuff that we're used to having to deal with in terms of getting our content into HTML. So that's filling that gap. What does React look like? This is an example. Along with React as a kind of library, Facebook also built something called JSX, which is a JavaScript syntax. It's exactly the same as JavaScript, except it allows you to put raw HTML straight into it. So you can see where we have this return div hello, and then this stop-props.name. What's happening there is we're saying we want this component to return a div with whatever the name is in it, and you can see how that's then rendered to the page. What actually happens is this obviously doesn't go into this isn't going straight into the browser. This also gets dealt with by grunt or something, or gulp in my example. And it gets rewritten into normal JavaScript. So JSX is kind of just a slightly abstracted syntax to make things nice and pretty, and then it gets just re-rendered. So it looks almost the same, and they've got a very good example of how it looks on their homepage. So on their React page on GitHub. But yeah, that's that. So that's how the component looks, and we'll come into our one. How might a JS-based theme look? So you're probably all used to the current standard. This is something that should look fairly familiar to everyone. There's obviously a bit of simplification going on here. I haven't got any images or any best practice stuff like languages, that kind of thing. But it's a basic theme with very basic files. and these are all included and everything else, and that's how this whole thing gets put together. What if it looked like this, maybe? So this is quite simplified as well, but you've got the core things that make this a theme. So you've got index.php, you've got style.css, and then you have your JavaScript file. And those top three things are all that actually need to run, because everything below themename.js gets compiled into themename.js in this example. So all those JSX files are all different things that are smushed together with browserify and then pushed into this one file. And that's what the user actually needs. So you can see I've broken this down into the different kind of DOM parts, well, not even DOM, but the different kind of element parts of what you get within a theme. So we've got like the hentree and the loop. There's different ways you could do this. This is just in fact, I've moved slightly away from this exact layout since I started doing this, but there's a way of doing it. So, the big reveal. Eating my own dog food. This presentation is a WordPress theme that has been built with the REST API. And I'm going to quickly show you how that actually looks. But before I do, this is the back end of these slides now. Are just each one is a post, and I'm just going from one to the next with the directional keys on my keyboard. It says Mahalo in this one because this screenshot's actually from when I gave a talk about this topic in Hawaii. But so these slides aren't they're almost exactly the same. Not quite. We're getting pretty close though. So yeah, how does this work? Let's show you. So this theme is on GitHub. It's called Picard Present. It's a mini version of Picard. Picard is not currently open source. That theme I showed you right at the very start, but it is going to be. And my deadline for that is the start of May. So by the start of May, Automatic will have open sourced Picard, and it will have a good README, and it will be understandable, and you'll be able to work with it. But for now, I'll go through this one, which is the GitHub repo, which you can go and look at and you can play with. The README is not amazing, but it hopefully will get you started. We have some limitations on this one. So for example, there's a spelling error there, but yeah, your permalinks have to be year, month, day, and then post name, and I'll show you why in a second. But there is a way of, like, ultimately our theme it will work with any permalink structure. So this is the root directory. Let's move into the components directory. So in here we just have picard.jsx, and then we have our router and we have our content. Now, one interesting thing with building themes in this way is that you suddenly have to think about a load of stuff that you've probably never thought about before, like routing. So if you don't know what that is, or routing, if you're American, the router/router, it takes the URLs and it decides what to do with them. Obviously, in a normal website, that's all handled by WordPress. You don't need to think about it. Your permalink structure is all done, and you can just forget about it. But in this situation, we need to say what happens. So, if the user comes in to, this is picard.jsx. So, I'll come back to the router, but let's just quickly go to picard.jsx. So it's incredibly short. We've got this horrible bit of jQuery, which just catches anything on that menu that you saw. That's going in the final version that we will release. And all that really happens to get this whole thing going is the router component is called in. In fact, I'll use the that's a nice way of doing it. The router is called in by browserify. This is how this little require thing works, and we get that bit in. We've also got our external dependencies at the top, and I'll explain what they do. And then here, for this little bit, we render. So we're rendering to the div main, basically. So we have the normal, our theme has a normal div with an ID of main, and we attach the router to that. So let's see what the router does. The router is in its own little directory, and then we have the file called router.jsx. If we go into that, we can see how this works. So what it does, and this is, so we have this page component now. Its full name is page.js, and it's just a really simple JavaScript router. So it does a load of the stuff that you don't need to think about. So we can say if the URL is this, do this, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. So what happens is, if the URL is the root, then we tell the content component, which is the next component that deals with the actual data, we tell it that the API, the REST API URL is wp-json/posts, and this ties right back to what I said at the start when I was showing you how the REST API actually works. And then we say if it's a sort of year, month, day URL, then we need to basically find the slug, and then we need to pass that to the REST API. So you can use these different filters here, and the REST API actually allows you to do pretty much anything you can do with WP Query. It's slightly different how it does it, but you can pretty much get anything out of it from your WordPress site. So yeah, we're working out with this little context. The slug is it's all just kind of done for us. It's quite nice. And again, we then tell the content component that it's going to have to go to the REST API and get that data. And then we have a wildcard because there could be anything. So if you filter through this, you might ultimately have like a not found in this section. But mainly what we're doing with this, and it's not fully completed, but we're working out if it's a page. So if it's a page, it doesn't have year, month, day, slug, and it could actually be anything. And all we really know about a page is that its slug will be the last part of its URL. Obviously, if it's a child page, it's going to have different bits before that. So what we do, we break it down, whatever URL it is, and we work out what the last bit is, and then we pass that in a similar way to above, but we also give it the parameter of it being a page type, which is just there. And again, we tell the content URL that its body class should be page, and we tell it that the URL for the REST API is that. So I hope that makes sense. And then the last bit here is just starting the router. So when the user first hits the site, the router is started, and that's how that works. There's some good README information on page. It probably seems a bit overwhelming at this stage, but as you can see, it's really not a lot of code. And all we're then doing is just returning it. This module exports bit is just part of the browserify language. So it's just saying, you know, this router thing here, if I just highlight it, that's what this module exports. Done. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So let's move on to content. Obviously, what you could see just in that last router example is that we're passing this different data to the content component. So let's look at the content component. Now, this is totally messy and hacky and horrible, and I don't recommend doing this in any way, but it does solve the immediate minimum viable product request of what we're trying to do. So what it does, component did mount is what React's way of saying, right, okay, we've asked for this component, how does it react? So what it does is it says load the post from the server. So we have a function called load post from server, and this is the full function, and it does some things it shouldn't do. But the important part is that it gets that URL that I showed you from the router, and it does an AJAX request, and it gets whatever comes out of that. And presuming it's successful, it then sets the state of this component to the data. What it's also doing is it stores that data in local storage, and you can see before it actually even does the AJAX request, it will actually say, well, hold on a minute, if we've already got this data from local storage, don't bother going to the server. Now, this is good because it makes it very fast. It's bad because there's absolutely no expiry or anything. So I wouldn't recommend doing this in production in any way, but it's nice for demonstrative purposes because it shows you what can happen. Because obviously this local storage thing, you know, that's just going to be in the user's browser potentially forever. That could be there for years. So definitely don't do that. But this is an example of how it can work. So we can check. And obviously it wouldn't take a lot to make this work better. We could say, we could store another little timestamp in local storage, and we could say, if that timestamp is more than an hour out of date, then we will go to the server again. Depending on the, you know, some types of site, you might just want to always get the latest stuff. You might not want to do that. But that's kind of an example of this thing I've been talking about with queuing stuff up. So that's what we do. Yes, we get that data from the server and we set the state. This is a React thing, so I won't get into too much detail about it because you need to sort of, if you are interested, then I highly recommend watching some talks about getting started with React. But it sets the component state to the data we get from the REST API. So the important part to notice now is we kind of daisy chain down to the component where we actually render this data that we've just got from the REST API. So what this ultimately does is it passes the data it has to the next component, which is the loop. So that's all you really need to know from this. If we now pop over to the loop, oh, I've done the wrong keyboard shortcut. Okay, so we're into the loop component, and if we go to loop.jsx, This doesn't do a great deal. There's a load of stuff here that deals with the keyboard shortcuts, so don't get overwhelmed by this at all, because it's nothing that clever. It's just dealing with all those keyboard shortcut things. The important part is that we get to this post nodes section. This is essentially an array, and what it does is it breaks down that data that I told you about into, if it's multiple posts, it breaks it into, it does this map element, map function here, where it breaks it down into individual posts, and then it ultimately passes to hentree, which is another component. It passes the post ID, the post class, the link, the title, the date, the content, and the featured image if it has one, and yeah, and some other bits which we don't need to worry about for this demonstration. So there, the post nodes are here. They get echoed into the browser here. They're in this transition group element. This is just an animation thing that React allow you to do. So basically what they're saying is anything within this chunk gets these special entry exit classes which allow you to animate things as they come and go. And that's how that animation was happening. Then below that, you've got the normal post navigation, more or less normal anyway. And we have the next and previous links, which again you could see in Picard. And all of my stuff up here just hacks like clicking them when you press left or right. That's what happens. We have this dangerously set inner HTML. React by default will escape everything that it gets given. Now we know that in this instance this is just the next and previous link, and we want it to come in not escaped, we want it to just be normal HTML. So they have this just to make you feel bad and make sure you know that you're being silly, potentially, if you use it. So dangerously set inner HTML, that's that. So into the hentree component, because that's what I've obviously got here. And now finally we're into hentree, and this will hopefully look more familiar because some of you might be completely confused by all of this. But here we are. Now we have some normal HTML, more or less normal. One quick thing to note is that with React, you have to use class name instead of class if you want to apply a class. That's simply because class is a protected term in JavaScript, so they've had to have an alias. You can use ID in the normal way and just read class name as class. That's all it actually means. But we can't use class because that'll break it. So yeah, we've got some fairly recognizable HTML. We're applying the post class to the article element. And as you can see, if we scroll down a bit, we've got the title is going in, and we're having to keep using this dangerously set inner HTML just because we know that this content is escaped already. We know it's fine, it's not escaped, but we know it's okay. And we do the same thing here for the content, and that's ultimately how we get down to each one of the slides that you've been seeing. There's some other little things I've got here that deal with clicks and stuff, so don't worry about that too much. But by all means, have a quick poke. So I think we're at the end. That's the end of my demonstration. So now it's very possible at the end of all this, I've completely lost you. So up to the point of me switching into the code, you sort of had some idea what I was talking about, and now it's gone mad. I totally understand. I didn't actually know anything about React until November, and initially it does seem a bit confusing, but you can pick it up really quickly. I have played around with these concepts in various different frameworks, and when I got to React, it actually just made so much sense. And doing it in the way that I've shown you, or variation. I'm not trying to tell you that's the way to do it, and I'm no expert, but yeah, it's really worth having a little play with. And when the proper Picard theme comes out, it will be properly documented in line and everything. So hopefully you'll be able to literally just read it and understand what's happening. So this presentation, the code behind it, is available on GitHub. GitHub.com on my personal account. WP API, if you're interested in how that's all coming together, that's available on GitHub as well, and there's the URL for that. React, if you want to learn more about React, that's on Facebook's GitHub page, and under React they've got a specific mini site for it, and it's really good. They've got lots of brilliant resources. Now I mentioned a couple of articles I'd read. I think there's a Chris Hutchinson who created he was part of the team that created that Sunday Times example. He's got a great post here if you want to have a read of that. I guess I'll include the links actually when I post this, because obviously you can't click these links because they're in a video. And there's a really interesting guy, Kadam White, who's given talks about similar stuff to me. He works at Boku in Boston, and he wrote. Actually, I think this is a link to his WordPress.tv talk, which again, if this is interesting you, definitely go and check that out. I think he explains it better than I do. And yeah, he's made some cool stuff, including this. Yeah, I won't explain it. I'll let him explain it. It's I'll just add more confusion. But there we are. That is the end of this talk, and I don't know how long it's taken me. Probably longer than it should. If you managed to make it this far, congratulations. And if you do have any questions, absolutely feel free to call out to me on Twitter. You can also, you probably saw my email address earlier on, it's justjack@automatic.com. I'll try to answer any questions I can as soon as I can. I tend to take on far too much, so I might take quite a while to reply, but I will reply if I can, and I'm probably going to be quicker on Twitter, let's face it, because that's an easier way of communicating and it's nice and limited. Yeah, so Picard will be out beginning of May. I'm committing to that, and it will have a lovely README, and it will be easier to understand than me trying to talk about it for about 40 minutes. Thank you very much. I hope to see you all on the webs and at further conferences and WordCamps and other things. Take care.